Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Turbine Art Fair Talks program for 2021. I'm James Say. I'm the curator of the program. This is our penultimate talk in the 2021 series. The live, as you all know, it's a hybrid event this year. The live art fair completed on Sunday. The talks program continues until tomorrow, so this is our penultimate talk in the series. All the talks and indeed the entire fair are generously sponsored by iToo Art Insure, specialist art insurers who insure everything from museum collections to private collections. I've been in business for over a decade. There is a link through to their specific offerings on the site. You can see it on the tile on your right. And tonight we are joined by illustrious gallerist company talking about collecting and art dealing in the post-COVID era. How has the last 18 months or so of lockdown changed the gallery collecting and art dealing business landscape and artistic landscape? We are joined by Julie Taylor, from the gallerist of and owner of Guns and Rain Gallery, based in Johannesburg, but Pan-African in orientation, and Charl Bezuidenhout, who's the owner and founder of WorldArt Gallery based in Cape Town, and who is also going to offer us, or at least both of our panelists are, but Charl has taken the intrepid step of being the first South African gallery to sell via the NFT platform, or Nifties, as they're known in the online frat boy trade. So Charl has actually been there and done that, so he'll be addressing that specifically as part of the move online for dealing and collecting and buying art. How we will proceed this evening is, as we have done with all of the talks in our series in 2021. Each of our panelists will in turn address the area under discussion in a 10-minute or so initial input. We'll then have some directed discussion between us on screen following each panelist's input, and then we will open the floor to our delegates and attendees this evening. Each of you, please feel free at any time to put in comments or questions in the chat box on the right of your screen, and I will direct them appropriately as they come in. But seeing as how it's a cozy panel of two this evening, it'll probably be an open discussion for that input, but feel free at any time to put your questions in the chat. So, kicking us off with discussing art collecting in a post-COVID era, I'm going to hand over to Julie to start us. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks very much, James, and thank you, Turbine Art Fair, for the invitation to take part in this panel. And also thanks and congratulations to the fair, really, for pulling off a fair in these uncertain times. It's been a challenging time for everyone, and I think it's fantastic that Turbine stepped up and pulled off the first offline/hybrid fair of the past 18 months. So good job and keep it up. Hopefully it's onwards and upwards from here. So yes, we're here to talk about how the pandemic might have changed things in the art market, and I think we all have our own experiences of what thoughts and feelings were coming over us as lockdowns around the world began to be announced, sort of February, March, April 2020. And, personally, I thought, gosh, maybe this is the beginning of the end. It was very difficult to, in terms of my own business, I really wasn't sure what to expect or predict from the period that followed. And I think there was a lot of fear and uncertainty. I think I have been very pleasantly surprised that the pandemic has brought all sorts of new opportunities to engage with collectors and to engage with education around visual art in all sorts of new ways. And admittedly, we are a bit bored of some of those ways now. We are, I think, all a bit tuned out of Zoom discussions and webinars more so than we were, let's say, a year ago. But I do think there have been a lot of silver linings to the pandemic, ways in which we could gather and talk and learn about art in new ways, very different kinds of ways, not always perfect ways, but new ways which have helped us kind of learn and engage. So I think one of the questions that James posed was whether kind of the profile of collectors has changed because of the change in global conditions. And I think, if we look at the art market in the broadest terms, and this is, far beyond probably most of our relatively local worlds, I think there is a continued sort of bifurcation which reflects the entrenched and widening nature of global inequality, first of all. So I think we have seen some really crazy and extraordinary prices at the high end of the market, alongside real poverty and hardship in many other spheres. And, this is the reality of late capitalism. This is where our choices as societies around the world have brought us. And, I do remember attending a webinar probably around this time last year, which was a webinar held by the mega galleries, Gagosian, David Swerner, and also Sotheby's. And the Sotheby's rep was talking about how their day sales for, I think it was either Q2 or Q3 in 2020, more than tripled what they had made in the same period in 2019. It was a figure over $3 million versus $80 million in the same period the previous year. An hour later, I spoke to a friend in London who runs a restaurant, and his restaurant was just getting back on its feet after an extended lockdown period. They put out a call for 2 new waiters at the restaurant. Within 2 hours, there were 300 applications for 2 waitering jobs. And I must say, my head was spinning because I'd been on this call with, the Sotheby's and the Gagosian and the Zwerners talking about how amazingly well they were all doing at the high end of the art market. And then, the story about how the people who accepted the waitressing jobs were actually managerial level staff who were willing to work at minimum wage with no tips. So, I think these things are reflecting in the art market as well. What's out there in the global economy is in the art market. When Guns N' Rains started, we were selling mostly editions at much lower prices. 7 years later, we are selling almost exclusively original works at significantly higher prices. What I've observed in the past year is that we are seeing fewer local collectors from South Africa. I would say local collectors are much more affected by price points. They are much more price sensitive over the past year, whereas our international collector base has grown. And we've met many new collectors during the past year, happily, online. I think another question that James posed was, is it still so important to physically view an artwork before buying it? And I think obviously this question has become more central thanks to the pandemic, but it's certainly not a new question. And it's a question that I've been asking since the very seedling days of the gallery. It's been part of kind of Guns and Rain DNA since 2013, which is when I started the gallery as an online only space. And I've always strongly believed in the power of technology to expand the way that we engage with art. And note that I say expand, not replace. You know, technology is never going to allow us to interact with an artwork like we do in the flesh. In the flesh, it is tactile, it is visceral, it is emotional in ways that are not going to be replicated online. And I have stronger feelings about that when we come to NFTs, but we'll get to that. So yes, you know, I think people's threshold for what they consider to be a threshold or parameters that they refer to in terms of making a decision to buy art, I think those things have changed, and there's a greater trust in online buying. People have been forced into taking more risks, perhaps. They've been more experimental. They've been willing to take a risk, seeing something only as a JPEG, only as a photograph, only as something over my WhatsApp video feed, and making a decision. I think most collectors do know that if a JPEG speaks to them quite strongly, it's likely that the real thing will speak to them even more in the flesh. And to be honest, from a Guns and Rain perspective, we've had that experience right from the start, that people would look at an artwork online, they'd think it was amazing, and then they'd receive it and they would think it's even more amazing. It's never happened the other way around, or at least not that any collectors have ever told me. You know, maybe it has happened and they didn't report back. But I do think usually online is a good starting point. It's a good starting point. So I think confidence in online buying has been boosted, partly because of lack of options and choice to see art in the flesh. And I think people have been interested in building relationships online as well. It's been an isolated and lonely time for many, and we've all lived increasingly online. Galleries want to know who they are selling to. Collectors want to know who they are buying from. And so I think, you know, we've used online in various ways to build those relationships and get to know people on the other side of the world. And I think from my perspective, it's gone amazingly well. So I'm not sure if I'm running over time yet, James. I might stop there.
Don't feel hindered by the clock, Julie.
Okay.
Continue.
Well, I'll say. Shall I say
and
a
I
few
want
brief
you to,
things
I want you to address
NFTs?
the nifty thing as well.
Okay. Well, I think Charl's probably better positioned to comment and has been more at the coalface of this new movement. So, you know, I don't know how much people know about NFTs. I am still learning. I know a fair bit about blockchain and crypto, less so about NFTs, but basically they use blockchain to record the ownership of digital items, which could be images, videos, collectibles, or even virtual tracts of land. They are one of a kind original assets. Reports in the last few days, show that the sales volumes of these NFTs have reached kind of crazy proportions in the, over $10 billion just in the third quarter of this year, which is, I think, up something like, eightfold from the previous quarter. So there's obviously a huge amount of excitement and speculation in the space. I think maybe what people don't realize, we tend to hear about the real big numbers, but most NFTs are being sold for under $1,000. And the number of NFT buyers actually is pretty small. So probably somewhere between like 250, 300,000 kind of active wallet users who are trading NFTs. So Obviously, everyone's statistics differ a bit, but this is only going to be about like 2% of the total art market. So I think, in general, there's lots of speculation in the crypto space. It's definitely related to the pandemic, to what's happened with financial markets over the past year, to do with global uncertainties of all kinds in multiple countries around the world, including a lot of political uncertainty. And I think there's still a lot that's going to play out. I think that blockchain technology is definitely here to stay, and I think blockchain will change the future of money and many other aspects of life. As to whether NFTs will stay, I am much less certain. Everyone is hopping on the bandwagon. I just got an email this morning from 154 in London, which announces their NFT play for next week in collaboration with Christie's. They are they're selling the first NFT by an African artist that's being offered by Christie's in Europe. So yeah, there's a lot of getting on the bandwagon. I feel a bit skeptical about it all. What does it mean for the traditional art gallery and for traditional collectors? I think it's a different category. It's a different kettle of fish. In some ways, NFTs are irrelevant to traditional art because most of us here involved in the industry, we like art in the flesh because it is art in the flesh. Like that's why we like it. So, whilst we might buy art online, whilst we might market art online, whilst Guns N' Rain might have an artsy page, the ultimate product is still something that exists in the flesh. And so for me, talking about NFTs, it's kind of like wanting to compare apples with jellyfish. It's like, two completely different things. So if you want to buy a GIF of a flying cat for $500,000, be my guest. I'm not going to. And I won't repeat some of the rude things that Banksy has said in the process of selling his own NFTs for huge amounts of money. But, it's interesting. It's going to create and drive a different class of collectors. I don't think that collectors who love physical art will suddenly start diverting their cash to NFTs. They might complement their collections. I think these NFT collectors are going to be younger people. They're going to be under 40s. They're a new breed of collectors who, have a different take on the digital world. And it's changing quickly all the time. In terms of artists, I think it's interesting and exciting that anyone can tokenize their work. There are going to be new opportunities for artists. Artists can potentially be more in control of their own production and their own sales. That's already happening with the online art market. And of course, NFTs are already raising interesting intellectual and legal questions around ownership, copyright, revenue streams, who benefits, when, for how long, how that all gets tracked. It's all very interesting. But for me personally, I don't find it aesthetically particularly interesting. But that's just my personal feeling, and maybe that'll change. Maybe Charl's going to change my mind. I'll end there. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie. Charl, you've been set up there. Charl Bezuidenhout, owner of WorldArt Gallery in Cape Town and the purveyor of the first NFT-related artwork in South Africa, which was work by artist Norman O'Flynn. When was it, Charl? 2 months ago?
Yeah, no, it was in March, April we did that already.
Okay, all right.
So time flies.
Time does fly when you're in lockdown.
Yeah.
But Charl, over to you to address this set of issues.
Yeah, I think, Julie, you've got everything spot on. At the end of the day, it's a new territory. It has certain elements attached to it that are really important for the future, like blockchain technology in general. And I think that's really where I am. That technology is so powerful and so strong, and it's going to change so many things that the NFT element of it and the digital art of it, it's just one thing. And right now there's a lot of hype about that, mainly because of the prices that's been fetching in the market and so on. It is, I think, also really important because it allowed digital art for the first time to be commodified, so to speak, in the sense that you could now prove the ownership, and therefore it has a certain value, or it attaches value to it, and people can start trading with it. So that's great. But it's early days, at the moment. I think maybe what I can add that hasn't been said yet is it's so early that the barriers to entry is actually really high. For you to purchase an NFT, you've got to get a wallet, you've got to get crypto into it. There's a lot of things you have to do before you can actually start participating. And it's risky, it's all those things. But I'll never forget, 20 years ago when I started in the art business, I started working for a gallery, and I was saying to the guy, listen, mate, we really need to get a website. And they were saying to me, no, but it takes too long to download one image. Art is about the visual, and it takes you 10 minutes to download one 200 kilobyte photograph. This will never work. And look at where we are today. And I think the same will go for this blockchain technology. There are issues around it at the moment, but these things are constantly being addressed by people who understand the issues, and they're improving it. So from that point of view, I'm taking it very seriously. I also, of course, I don't think it'll replace physical art as we know it. It never will. It's something different. It just opens up a new scope or a new spectrum of a new type of buyer or collector that can now enter the market. On top of that, I look at my kids. I've got two boys. The one is 13, the one is 11. And they virtually, they're very active boys. They play sports and they're healthy and they're all that. But they also have a very strong presence in their world, the gaming world and so on. And that relies on avatars, on skins, on things like that. So they're developing a certain digital visual literacy and taste that I don't think people from my generation even really understand. And it'll be interesting to see where that goes to in the future. And during COVID, for instance, what they would do is they would get together every night at 6, 7 o'clock, 4 or 5 friends, and they'd play games. It was Fortnite at the time, I think. And the banter and everything was similar to the way we had it at school, except for you now chose your image in a different way. It cost me a lot of money, of course, because I'm spending, money on skins and stuff. But so anyway, the point is just this is on that level important, and NFTs play into that. I think another thing about NFTs is, as I say, there's a lot of hype about it and so on. And Julie was saying earlier on that, it doesn't sell for that much money. It actually, I think that what one should say is there are millions and millions and millions of NFTs that won't sell at all. There are lots of people doing digital artworks that aren't really that good at all. Some of the very good ones, yes, they're there, they sell, but some bad ones sell. So again, that word hype and so on, that's just where we are right now. And I think that thing will settle down and the quality will drift up and the technology will make it easier, etc., etc. Then together with that, for me, I think the real value at this point lies in the fact that you get things like a royalty fee attached to it. So every time an NFT sells, that artist who created it will get a royalty payment. That's just a massive improvement on the way things are. And it's something that a big part of the art world always wanted to happen. And there we go. So there's one thing. There may be ways in the future that we can use NFTs as certificates of authentication, which I think will be a really valuable attribution. Also provenance, who's owned this before. Those things have always been important in the art world and in dealing with art. And blockchain technology helps us to get there. And for that reason, I think it's something that I certainly I just jumped in. I want to be part of it and I want to understand it. And the best way to do it is to do it. And that's where I'm at the moment with that.
I want to jump into some issues there. Charl, thank you for that. That's really interesting perspectives. I don't want to drag the discussion back to just the online collecting issues, which you haven't really touched on that deeply, Charl. But but we can circle back to that. Let's kick off with something you mentioned there, which is very important to, and this goes out to both of you. It's very important to both major segments of the market, the primary market and the secondary market. And there are two parts to it. The first is royalties, royalty payments, which NFTs enable. And that isn't enabled currently in the secondary market via works in the flesh in most parts of the world. There are isolated pockets of territories where royalties are paid on secondary sales. So that's the first issue. I want to just I'd like you to address, both of you address how that might work in an NFT enabled art buying environment. And then the second part of that question is really about, Charl, you mentioned authenticity and provenance. Now, what that implies is that there is the possibility of digital authentication for works that in the physical realm that are reproducible, so print editions and multiples. Like, how do we see this? How do we get our heads around this? Is it possible? Is it doable? Is it the way of the future?
Well, you know, exactly how we're going to do it is it's not 100% certain yet. I mean, for instance, if I want to authenticate a painting with something that lives in the digital world, how am I going to do that? Am I going to put a chip in the frame of the painting, or will an image be enough, or will an image of a person painting the artwork, and then that, of course, can be falsified as well? I mean, we don't really know all those things yet, but we're stepping closer and closer to a terrain where the information that we do have cannot be hacked. It lives in a decentralized world. It's not being controlled by one person or an entity. And there are technological aspects attached to it that helps us to achieve this, as I said, perhaps with putting a chip or some sort of QR code or something on the physical work that connects it to the NFT. It's a process. We're getting there. I just think that we're moving closer and closer to that being perfected, and eventually we'll get the benefit from that.
Julie?
Well, I think, I mean, I'm slightly moving away from NFTs and artworks themselves, but more broadly in the art world, you know, what are the other applications of blockchain? I mean, a lot of gallerist colleagues at the moment are having issues with shipping. You know, why can't we apply blockchain tech to shipping processes so that we actually know where a problem has happened or where something's got stuck and who's responsible? Because at the moment, the courier companies are very quick to say, oh, no, nothing to do with us. But, you know, if we were to integrate blockchain approaches and solutions into other parts of the art industry, yeah, there'd be lots of benefits there as well in terms of transparency, accountability, and so on. So, yeah, a little bit of a diversion there, but I am dealing with a number of shipping headaches at the moment.
But I think that's the point, really. This is technology that it's the beginning of it for us. And the NFT thing, as I said earlier on, around that one should look deeper and further, and this technology will become more important for us in the art world as well. And again, you know, it's not going to replace anything that Julie and I are busy doing in terms of dealing in real physical paintings. It will enhance that world we work in, and it will offer extra benefits to us.
Sorry, I lost you a little bit there, but you know, I think what you're saying is that yeah, our world is becoming sort of augmented in new ways, and yeah, there are going to be these new sort of well, in addition to sort of underlying technologies, which might change quite a lot of our processes and systems and so on, there are also these, new sort of markets which are developing on the fringes of the traditional market and may sort of augment and expand it in some interesting ways.
I want to ask something that kind of ties together some of the online collecting issues with the issues that NFTs raise, and that's about the globalization of markets. So, in shipping terms, you've got to, if a collector elsewhere in the world buys a work that's in South Africa, there is, and it's sight unseen, or it's been seen via JPEG or a website. There is a kind of additional burden of responsibility for authentication and for the representation of the work, essentially. And like, how much, we're not talking NFTs here, but how much have you experienced in your galleries, in your gallery practice and business that you do around the world? Have you experienced that pressure to demonstrate works to best advantage and authenticate works via your online channels? Has it been something you've had to adapt your practices to?
Julie, if I can go, I don't know, not like that, not in that sense for me. I mean, obviously a gallery, and there's a certain relationship of trust. There's a certain kind of way that a brand is perceived, and the people that purchase from you online and otherwise, generally it's a longer conversation. It's not okay, cool, I'll take that, how much is it, thank you very much. It's much more than that. It's a longer conversation that goes, whether it's email or telephone or whatever. So there is an inherent sense of trust involved when you do this anyway. And the certificate of authentication would generally come afterwards. You'd send the painting and you'd send a certificate that's signed by the artist and by the gallerist. And it has a certain value, usually for insurance purposes and a few other things. So, yeah, I don't know if it's because we deal online that those certificates have become more important, although one can say, yes, probably it should or would have, but that's not my experience. My experience is that there's still a very strong human element, and with that, an element of trust involved, and the tools we use to make sure that everybody is above board with everything they do, like the certificates, etc. Well, it's still a very sort of almost archaic process where I would typically send someone actually a JPEG of the certificate, and then after that mail it to them physically so that they have that physical piece of paper in their hand. And a few years from now, maybe that won't be necessary anymore in the context of this conversation.
Yeah, I think my experience is similar to Charles. There is still a kind of basic transaction based around trust and the physical object, and especially with COVID, to be honest, we have multiple hard copy certificates sitting in the office, waiting to be sent out at a time such that we can send it easily, cheaply, and safely, which is less and less easy from South Africa, given, international courier costs and so on. And we don't want to spend a huge amount sending out one piece of A4 paper. So we try to find ways to make it more efficient. But I think exactly the same kind of process that you're talking about, and which is quite old fashioned, quite manual. Send the artwork, send a scan of the certificate, and later send the hard copy. But yes, I'm sure that is going to change in a number of ways, and I'm sure that these new technologies that are emerging will help us find ways to do that quite simply and quite easily.
have you guys, as gallerists, quantified how your clientele has changed in this kind of lockdown period over the last 2 years or so? I mean, have you quantified how many more people are buying online from you?
It's a tough question to answer that, Julie, isn't it? Because what I have found is I'm selling more units, but I'm selling them at lower prices. And the way that I understand that is, in the past, I would do 3-4 big art fairs a year where I will get a dedicated art appreciating crowd who can probably afford a certain amount of money for a painting. That's generally not there anymore, up until now, basically. Whereas, yeah, then on my other channels, whether it's the social media channels or online exhibitions that I do or whatever, yeah, there's been good activity there, but obviously at a lower price point. So more units are being sold, but is the turnover more? Not really. So in terms of quantifying it like that, yes, that's as much as I can offer. But then at the same time, then I can also say that the activity was there, the people's interest was there, and those people who were previously maybe buying at high prices were now experimenting and willing to pursue the online channels to purchase through. Nothing has stopped, maybe it's kind of just changing slightly for the time being, but the activity, the interest, the desire, it's all still there. Quantifying it, difficult. I don't know. It's too early to say for me, but hey, the business is still there, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, really interesting insights, Charl. Thanks for sharing. I think on our side, really the vast majority of sales now are, driven by virtual viewing, and that's a mix of factors, but I think it shows what can be done marketing and sales wise, even, I mean, contrary to everything that we expected. I think previously all of us did depend a lot on art fairs as these kind of anchor events through the year. We'd have, a handful of anchor events where we'd expect that, over this weekend is going to generate, whatever, 30% of annual turnover. And I think the pandemic has shown that this doesn't have to be the way that it is. And I think a lot of us gallerists have also realized that the kind of the stress, the expense, the travel requirements for all these international fairs, we're asking questions about whether all of that is strictly necessary anymore. It's not to say that it can't be great or it can't be good, or there aren't benefits from it, but I think a lot of us, and this applies to collectors as well, realizing that they don't need to be on a plane like as much as they used to in order to still have access to great art. All that said, I think we are all sick of online at the moment, and I think most of us are dying to get a bit of real world experience, but I think everything feels still somewhat fragile, and it's a bit like taking a few steps forward at a time at the moment. Going back to the quantification question, I haven't kind of run the numbers yet, but just off the top of my head, like I said, vast majority of sales are happening via images rather than in real life. And price points, that's an interesting question. I think I've been surprised by how much some collectors are willing to spend unseen. But in general, our price points are pretty low. So maybe I shouldn't be too surprised. I think collectors are willing to take risks under a certain price threshold. I think above that, and maybe, Charl, maybe this is also what you're referring to, above a certain threshold, collectors are more anxious to kind of hit go, unless, until they've seen it in the flesh, or they've got some more kind of reassurance. I think, yeah, those are my preliminary thoughts.
Cool, thank you both. I have one more issue I'd like to put to both of you, but I just want to reach out to everyone who's in attendance. If you do have a question or comment, please pop it in the chat so we can address it to our panelists. My last question to you both is, what about the short and the medium term outlook for the art business, for your galleries? Do you think everything is going to revert back to normal? Presumably, sometime during the year after wave 4, things will normalize after the midterm elections, perhaps, and our 4th wave in December. But, at some stage, presumably, there will be a recalibration of the market. Do you think things will return to normal? Or do you think this move to online as a serious forum for dealing and collecting is going to be permanent?
Well, Julie, if I may, I don't think things will ever be the same it was in the past, but in terms of I think art fairs in the future, for instance, they will still exist, but they will just do a stronger digital presentation as well, or offering. I doubt whether an art fair in the future, for instance, won't have a very sophisticated viewing room as well, which I think is fantastic because they will attract bigger audiences. I think also partnerships with other platforms like Artsy and so on will play an important role. We've seen that incidentally now with the Turbine Art Fair. I mean, it wasn't that easy because people had to go online, book a time slot, show their vaccination certificates, etc. So, so only a few people could actually visit the fair, but through Artsy and and their own website, a lot of people approached us, and I think that's more what the model will look like in the future for them. At the gallery itself, I don't know, I will never not have a physical gallery space. I may tweak it a little bit to look more like a viewing room, but I doubt that even. I think that will always be there. I think all that's happened right now is that we have made our digital presence more sophisticated. And what in the short and the long term world, other than that, I don't know. Let's wait and see. But I think we certainly we've gained a few arrows in our quiver to ply our trade with, and that's the main result of all this.
Julie?
Yeah, I think interesting insights there from you, Charl. Thanks for sharing. And I agree with a number of your sentiments, and perhaps I preempted James's question by referring to, gallerist and collector perspectives on fairs and the future. I agree that I don't think things will be the same. I think people have been forced to digitize and go online fast, or much faster than they would have otherwise. And I think that is a good thing for everyone. And as you say, I think that digital angle of event making, of exhibition making, etc., of marketing is going to remain part of the furniture, even if it may not be as central as it has been in the past 18 months. So yeah, I mean, look, I've always been a kind of tech evangelist, so I'm pretty happy that everyone's been forced to get on board in a way. And yeah, I mean, I think I think our local markets, I'm not sure. I think it's already a small market, a small and unequal market. And I think sales within South Africa are not going to be the easiest in the next year or two. I think some effects of the pandemic are only just starting to be felt in terms of kind of the longer term economic outlook. But I think that markets where I think the US and China are going to drive the market as they have been doing, and will grow. And as to how much we return to the crazy fair cycle, I'm not sure. I do think that we're going to have COVID hiccups still for the next 18 to 24 months. Waves will continue. We still have lots of unvaccinated people around the world. There will be more variants coming out. So I think we need to be ready for all sorts of things, I guess. But I think that this time has made us kind of recalibrate, rethink, and I think, like I said at the beginning, there are some silver linings, and we do have new opportunities to learn and think about art, and new opportunities for collaboration. I think that has definitely come across quite strongly. Gallerists, institutions, people on the other side of the world who wouldn't historically have been interested in collaborating with us, whether that's Guns and Rain or us as African galleries more broadly. I think, they are much more open-minded to doing that. And for Guns and Rain, the past 6 months, we've got more international collaborations underway than ever before. And I think part of that is an outcome of the ethos of the gallery, but part of that is an opening of the mind to what this new world looks like, and the fact that collaboration is, rather than competition, is more of a way forward.
Wonderful. Thank you both. We'll just hold on for a second to see if there's any questions. The floor is open to everyone in attendance. If you have a question for our panelists or a comment.
Come on, everyone, be brave. Type faster.
It seems not. Okay, I think we can leave it there. Charl, Julie, thank you very much for those insights. I think it was a very fruitful discussion, and very frank and open, which is refreshing from gallery owners who usually play their cards close to their chest, as you know. We have some input from Liesel. Affected equals expanded. The answer to the topic of this webinar is that affected equals expanded, which I think is a fair summary. I think both of you have been saying expanded in terms of potential reach directly to collectors and buyers, but also in terms of, Julie, what you were just pointing out, which is collaborations and different ways of working, which is a very interesting and productive byproduct, if you like, of the ways in which the market has had to turn to survive in the face of being deprived of live events and affairs as a forum. So yeah, I think we have addressed that. Thank you, Liesel. But guys, I'd just like to thank you both again for that wonderful, valuable input. Just in terms of housekeeping, the recording of the talk will be available via links on the Turbine Art Fair website in 24 hours. So by tomorrow afternoon, it should be up there. Those of you who want to request it directly can do so to me directly at the email address I've just posted in the chat. And once again, thank you to both of our panelists and thank you to everyone who attended. Guys, all the
Thanks,
best.
everyone. Have a great evening.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.